New York has 5 boroughs, but each one shapes you completely differently, from the way you talk to the way you move to what you think real New York actually is. And you can always tell where someone's from based on their energy, their references, and what they consider normal, because growing up in Manhattan is nothing like growing up in the Bronx, which is nothing like growing up in Queens, and if you're really from here, you know exactly what I mean. Tell me which borough raised you, because this breakdown is about to call you out. Manhattan kids grew up thinking they lived in the center of the universe because they kind of did, walking to school past landmarks tourists pay to see, riding the subway alone at 12 because that was just normal, and developing this specific confidence that comes from growing up surrounded by everything. Which is why people from other boroughs think Manhattan kids are spoiled, but really, they just grew up in a completely different version of New York, where convenience and access were never a question. Brooklyn kids have this edge that comes from growing up in the most diverse and most gentrified borough at the same time, watching their neighborhoods transform, knowing which blocks were theirs and which blocks weren't, and carrying this pride that's half nostalgia for what Brooklyn was and half defensiveness about what it's becoming, which is why Brooklyn people are the most likely to argue about what's real New York and what's not. Queens kids are the most low-key because they grew up in the borough everyone forgets about, even though it's the biggest and most diverse, riding the 7 train through a dozen different countries in a dozen stops, knowing where to get the best food from every culture, and moving through the city with this quiet confidence that comes from never needing to prove they're from New York, because they just are. Bronx kids have the hardest energy because they grew up in the borough everyone writes off, the one that gets the least respect and the most stereotypes, and that chip on their shoulder comes from constantly defending where they're from while also loving it fiercely, because the Bronx built resilience in a way the other boroughs didn't, and if you're from there, you carry that forever. Staten Island kids are the most defensive because they grew up in the borough everyone mocks, the one people say isn't even really New York, and they spend their whole lives explaining why the island matters, why the community is tighter, why it's actually the realest part of the city, and if you laugh at Staten Island around someone from there, you're about to get a lecture you didn't ask for. Each borough gives you something different. Manhattan,